Hi, and welcome to the Johnny Random Show. Today I'm doing a reaction video. I've been watching a lot of this LFR Family, and I think you'll enjoy this. I certainly enjoy a lot of his reactions. I haven't seen this one, so this is a true, genuine reaction to his video that he's watching on Thomas Sowell, explaining German history and the Holocaust. So it should be interesting. Let's go. The thing I appreciate, I will say about Van specifically in his journey here is he's just honest about it. He's not endorsing these things. He's not saying that he agrees or disagrees per se. He's just honestly looking and exploring and giving his takes. So that's why I appreciate his spin here. And I don't know if you've noticed, I'm in my garage now. I cleared out this corner finally, so I'm have a place to do these instead of my kitchen table now.
Sent me books. Thank you so much. All right, let's get into this and see what happens, man. And share this to as many people as possible because I want many people who look like me to hear about Thomas Sowell. Yes, I want everybody to hear about Thomas Sowell, but I think it's imperative that people who look like me hear about this gentleman right here.
Fanatical nationalism was at the heart of the Nazi creed. To what extent did most Germans share that creed during the Nazi era? Was it a creed going back into history or continuing on past the Second World War? Patriotism has been common to peoples around the world, particularly in wartime, and especially when people have been led to believe that their country has been attacked. There is no reason to doubt the patriotism of the Germans during the Nazi era, but gauging public opinion in a totalitarian state can hardly be done with any precision. The euphoria with which the beginning of the First World War was greeted in Germany was all too common across Europe at the time. What of Germans outside of Germany, and across a wider stretch of history than a few decades of the 20th century? Despite the tenacity with which Germans clung to their own culture in the farthest reaches of the world, there was no such political loyalty to the German nation or its antecedents. Germans in Russia fought loyally against Germany in the First World War, as German Americans did in both world wars. No one found it noteworthy during the Second World War that so many top American military leaders were of German ancestry, nor was any question of conflicts of national loyalties raised. In Australia, those Lutheran churches that were subsidized from Germany tended to be sympathetic toward Germany, while those subsidized from the United States were not. Yet, once Australia went to war, even the Lutheran churches that had been sympathetic to Germany before now urged their members to fight for Australia and otherwise cooperate with Australian authorities. The Nazis worked hard to infiltrate German organizations in the United States, Brazil, and Australia during the years leading up to World War II, but with only limited success, despite tactics that sometimes included threats of reprisals against family members in Germany if their overseas relatives did not cooperate. Where German minorities had been badly treated, as in Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union, it was a different story.
Please excuse me for not saying too much because I am literally just now learning of all of this. It's my very first time. So if I do have to interject and ask a question or something, it will be like not, I will be outside of my reactors zone, trying to make sure that I stop the video at certain points of time, just for the sake of YouTube to do that thing with ads and whatnot. For this right here, completely in the dark, and I'm trying to learn. So if I don't say too much, please forgive me. Also, if you like this style of content, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Also the notification bell so that next time I do put out some content, you'll be the first to be notified. Thank you.
Talk before I know.
Germans in the Sudeten region of Czechoslovakia helped create the crisis that was resolved at the infamous Munich Conference of 1938, where Britain and France agreed that Nazi Germany should take over that whole region of Czechoslovakia. Later, when the German army invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Black Sea Germans welcomed them as liberators.
I do know that to a certain extent the Munich Accords, because it's getting a lot of attention right now with what's going on, sort of that appeasement policy, where Russia right now is invading Ukraine, and the thought was, oh, well, they're ethnic Russians here, so it justifies that invasion. I think the Munich Accords was kind of that same thing. It justified Hitler's advance into those territories because they were ethnic German. That was one of his rationales behind it. So
as did some non-German minorities. And then, after the Soviet army counterattacked, more than 250,000 ethnic Germans followed the Nazi army as it retreated back to Germany. During the post-war Red Army occupation of East Germany, tens of thousands of former Soviet Germans were forced to return to the USSR, though tens of thousands of others used false identities to avoid this fate, and still others avoided it by committing suicide.
Wow.
During
Sheesh.
the war, many Germans in the conquered lands, suddenly elevated to privileged positions as members of the master race by the Nazi occupiers, collaborated actively, leading to a post-war backlash that led to the expulsion of millions of Germans as mass punishment.
I almost feel bad for not sitting here taking notes, man, because he's giving some good information right now. And in this, one thing I'm really going to have a better understanding of the Holocaust once this is done. That's what I'm looking forward to, because I hear that that was like one of the most greatest tragedies of all time. And a lot of black people bring up the Holocaust when we're talking about reparations. We compare slavery to the Holocaust, and apparently those people were able to get some type of monies for what they went through. I suppose that's what black people would like to do too. People who are in the fight, I suppose. Okay, get back to it.
Irrespective of individual guilt or innocence. The question here, however, is not the balance of justifiable or reprehensible behavior on the part of Germans in Europe during a period of several years, but the larger historical question of whether the Nazi ideology and its horrifying consequences represented an enduring set of distinctive characteristics of Germans as a people. Those Germans living overseas, in lands where they had no special grievances and were free to express themselves, showed no such loyalty to Germany as a nation, much less to Nazi ideology, as to sustain a conclusion of indelible cultural characteristics favorable to the values of Hitler and the Nazis. The Nazi amalgamation of nation and...
That is wild that Thomas Sowell studied different nationalities, different cultures, different walks of life, and could translate the information to someone like myself, and almost like I'm right there in the room while he's talking about it. You know, it's pretty cool that he's passing this information down to other people who don't know much about it, because it's important that we know about their history. You know,
and the Nazis. The Nazi amalgamation of nation and race under totalitarian rule, one people, one country, one leader, led to the horror most unforgettably burned into the history of Germany and of Germans: the murder of millions of Jews and others deemed to be of inferior races.
Wow.
Was this the culmination of long-standing beliefs and actions of the German people, or a monstrous new creation of the Nazis? In Germany, as in other countries, there were people hostile to the Jews on religious, racial, or other grounds. Nor were these isolated, anti-Jewish individuals. There were institutions, movements, and political parties hostile to Jews, sometimes bitterly and venomously so. And these included historic figures from Martin Luther to Richard Wagner. But the ultimate question is how all this affected the behavior of the German people as a whole, as compared to other peoples in Europe and elsewhere. Self-aggrandizement and bias against others has been too tragically pervasive throughout human history and among peoples around the world to make it a distinctive characteristic of a particular people or a particular era. However, racism in its modern sense of belief in innate genetic inferiority and superiority of particular races has had a shorter history, dating from the last half of the 19th century, when some regarded this doctrine as a logical corollary of Darwin's theory of evolution.
I have to point something out. I really have to point something out. I really have to point this out. And I know this is probably most disrespectful, well, not disrespectful, just it might seem pointless to you all. You see Hitler's haircut. Do you see Hitler's haircut? The reason why I'm pointing out his haircut is because, wow, this is the haircut that's extremely popular amongst black men. This is called a temple taper. This is called a temple taper, the exact same haircut. I just find out a little awkward that this haircut it just so happens to be the haircut that a great deal of black men
I didn't know
get.
where you were going with that at first.
No bull. I'm okay. I know that was just a ridiculous point, but I had to point that out. Also, speaking of black men, if I just need like 100 to 150 of you guys to send this bad boy out, just to share it amongst your group, so that hopefully people who look like me can know exactly who Thomas Sowell is. Because
So I think it's funny. I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. He's sort of making his plugs.
I don't know who Thomas Sowell is, and they need to.
But anti-Semitism, in the strict sense of
Oh yeah, and I wanted to react to that. So he's talking about how Darwin's theory of evolution impacted this sort of like racial superiority. I'm actually going to be working on an episode eventually, and the point of it is going to be, was racism worse after slavery or during slavery? Because I think that racism, slavery, although it was horrible, and had racism in it, that racism actually got worse after slavery, for 3 or 4 decades, right after Reconstruction, and it kind of goes against a little bit of what Candace Owens is talking about, but not really. It sort of correlates, but not perfectly. And I want to make a whole episode in talking about that and splitting the nuances. So I've been really looking deep into some of that lately. So, but yeah, I definitely think that this is an interesting point that Thomas Sowell's talking about, how the theory of evolution and this sort of like superior race allows you to think of yourself differently rather than the sort of prevailing theories before, which made its way into the Constitution through Protestantism and the Reformation, and through the Renaissance era of the individual, of the inalienable rights. You're created to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, whatever. So yeah.
of believing in the biological inferiority of Jews as a Semitic people was one of the offshoots of what was regarded as scientific racism.
Scientific.
Wow.
This new racism
Wow.
that wrapped
Science.
itself in the mantle of science was neither peculiar to Germany nor limited in its application to Jews. In the United States, some referred to the immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe as the beaten men of beaten races, who would be incapable of being able to be absorbed into American society. The eugenics movement sought to limit the reproduction of inferior individuals and races so as to prevent the lowering of the national intelligence in future generations. Planned Parenthood was founded not simply as an organization for limiting the size of families in general, but more particularly to reduce the reproduction of the black population in the United States.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. People need to hear this. People need to hear this right here, man. This is gonna be all, man. People need to hear this. Planned Parenthood is held up like one of the greatest things that ever happened to the black community, and oh my gosh. Oh Lord, this is something right here. Okay.
But more particularly to reduce the reproduction of the black population in the United States, as Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger herself noted. Such ideas were common among intellectuals who considered themselves progressive at the beginning of the 20th
Wow.
century. Ironically, although the logical corollary of this genetic determinism was that national IQs would fall over time, as less successful people with generally lower IQs tended to reproduce at a higher rate than more successful people with higher IQs. Research in the last years of the 20th century showed that scores on IQ tests had in fact risen substantially in more than a dozen nations during the course of a generation or two. The question here, however, is not the validity of genetic determinism, but how widespread and how openly avowed it was during a particular era. Germans were neither exempt from nor unique in their susceptibility to this doctrine. Hitler's racism represented the gutter-level application of an idea discussed in more lofty tones at higher intellectual levels. Racism in our narrow modern sense has been a significant force for a little more than a century, while violent and lethal hatred of other groups goes back thousands of years. There were pogroms against Jews in Europe, and similar mass slaughters of Chinese minorities in Southeast Asia, centuries before most people had ever heard of genetics. What, then, has been the record of Germans in this longer and broader history of intergroup hostility, discrimination, and violence? Comparing Germans with other Europeans for the sake of convenience, it seems clear that whatever differences there were historically tended to show the Germans not as intolerant as most Eastern Europeans, for example, toward the Jews. Jews fleeing from Eastern Europe to Germany constituted about 1/5 of the Jewish population in Germany when Hitler came to power. However tragic that was in the light of later events, it was a very reasonable move in light of the differences between Germany and Eastern Europe at that time. Jews were so widely accepted in Germany that nearly half of all Jewish marriages there between 1921 and 1927 were marriages to people who were not Jews.
Wow.
German Jews were noted for being far more assimilated to the larger Western society than were Jews from Eastern Europe. And this was true not only in Germany, but in the United States and as far away as Australia. German American immigrant communities welcomed German Jewish immigrants as members of their Turnverein, singing groups, and other cultural organizations. 19th century German Jews living in Chile and Czechoslovakia likewise took part in the general cultural life of German communities in those countries.
Y'all ever met somebody so smart? I'm sure every single one of you probably know some. No, that's not true. Some of you know some people who are just world-class intelligent, like Thomas Sowell. This guy is a freaking genius, man. Just the way that I don't know, man. The fact that he would go out there, do all this research and package it up for us to be able to read it in a way that is understood, and this does nothing but give us more respect for other cultures, more understanding, more context. It gives us context. That's what it does. It shows us that even though these people, oh my gosh, were taught to do some things, they were people. They were real people. So I don't know, it gives you that full circle of understanding that a lot of us aren't really ready for.
Czechoslovakia likewise took part in the general cultural life of German communities in those countries. Jewish views of pre-Hitler Germany were very favorable, not only in Germany itself, but overseas. During the First World War, American Jewish publications were so favorably disposed toward Germany that they were investigated and prosecuted for favoring an enemy nation in wartime, leading to the famous clear and present danger doctrine in favor of free speech by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in cases involving Jewish writers, Abrams versus United States and Schenck versus United States. Even some Zionists in Palestine returned to Germany during the First World War to fight for the fatherland. Jews were, of course, not the only targets of racial hostility, nor Germany the only place where such hostility was expressed and acted out. What has been the record of Germans with regard to other racial or ethnic groups in other countries and in other times? We have already noted the cosmopolitan tone that Germans sought to maintain in the face of group identity extremism among Latvians and Czechs, though in both cases the Germans eventually decided that they had to defend themselves as Germans. In the Western Hemisphere, the first anti-slavery meeting in North America was held by Germans in 1688, and Germans in Brazil were likewise opposed to slavery there.
Get out of here. Get out of here. Wow, they're opposed to slavery, but everything else is, wow, okay.
In 1688,
right.
And Germans in Brazil were likewise opposed to slavery there.
Yeah.
A history of the antebellum South referred to a colony of anti-slavery Germans who settled in Texas, as well as Germans in Virginia who were antagonistic to slavery, and Germans in St. Louis who were strongly anti-slavery. When whites in early 19th century North Carolina voted to deny the franchise to free blacks, this disenfranchisement was opposed by voters in almost all of the western counties of the Piedmont region, where the Germans and the Scotch-Irish were concentrated. While Germans were split on many of the complex issues revolving around race and slavery, no prominent German-American leader was pro-slavery, and when the Civil War came, the large German population in Missouri was credited with keeping that state in the Union, despite many Confederate sympathizers among other Missourians. As for relations with the indigenous population of the Western Hemisphere, Germans were noted for getting along with the Indians better than other Europeans did, though all had clashes with the indigenous peoples at some point or other. Germans in Paraguay likewise treated the indigenous people in a more conciliatory manner than other Europeans had. In Australia, Germans established missions to help the Aborigines. As noted in an earlier essay, in the German colonies in East Africa, slave traders were hanged on the spot when they were caught in the act.
Wow.
The history of
Wow.
pre-Hitler Germans,
Sheesh.
whether at home or abroad, can readily stand comparison with that of most Europeans, just as the record of Europeans can stand comparison with that of most other races around the world. That is what makes what happened under Hitler and the Nazis even more chilling. If this could happen with Germans, it could happen with any other people.
Hold on one second, I just need to read this right here. So these are key facts in this whole Jewish communities of pre-war Germany. It says in 1933, Jews represented less than 1%, approximately 500,000 people of the total population of Germany. Sheesh. Oh my Lord. The majority of Jews in Germany, this is part number 2, the majority of Jews in Germany lived in major cities such as Berlin, Frankfurt am Main, and Hamburg. And Jews participated in many areas of German life, such as journalism, law, culture, and medicine. Wow. Wow. So they was doing a lot for Germany before they started being wow.
I think it's very, very, very important to understand how quickly the minds of people can be changed in a generation over a short amount of time, how people can be radicalized into some crazy, crazy ideologies. I think that you've seen this time and time throughout history, but I think it's also, there's the hope, because I think there's also times where minds have been changed in a generation through history. Just as easily as it can swing too far, it can swing too back. And progress is made in those swings. And as history is recorded, I feel like times can indeed get better and better over time. At least that's my hope.
Okay.
There were anti-Semites in Germany, as in other countries, and their words can now be read as alarming warnings in light of our knowledge of what lay ahead. But there was little at the time to serve as a credible warning of such a monstrous and almost inconceivable event as the Holocaust. Even if we confine the question to those Germans living in Germany during the fatal dozen years of the Nazi regime, the issue is whether the Germans of that era, or even those particular Germans whose votes put Hitler in power, were attracted to him for his racist agenda. In elections held from 1871 through 1928, German political parties explicitly devoted to anti-Jewish principles reached a high of 7% of the vote and a low below 1%.
Wow.
These parties included, but were not limited to, the Nazis. A study of anti-Semitism in Germany concluded, by 1914, the anti-Semitic parties were practically defunct, and their press was in ruins. Hitler's speeches during the election campaigns of 1928, 1930, and 1932 made no specific proposals on what he intended to do about Jews. He apparently did not see German public opinion as ready for any of the actions that he would, in fact, later take against the Jews. When the desperation of Germans in the face of severe economic and social crises created by the worldwide Great Depression of the 1930s elevated Hitler from a fanatic in the streets to a dictatorial ruler,
I think that you have to understand that the World War I was devastating to the Germans, and you're talking about a complete national identity wiped out. Not identity, but a complete national economy wiped out, and the Hitler came into a country that needed to latch onto some things, and he definitely had that economic proposals, and he didn't campaign on being racist, but he made it, obviously racist, along the way. There were hints, there were signs, and certainly what he did when he was in power, horrendous.
Die was cast, fatally.
Is there a story behind his mustache? I keep on bringing up the silly stuff, but these are the questions I have, and I'm not just doing it out of. It's not a nervous tick because I don't really have the best understanding of everything that's being explained right now. I don't learn the same as everybody else. I more than likely will have to go back and look at this again in order to really understand, and that's just how I learn. I apologize, guys.
No,
But
I
yeah,
hear you. Me
is
too.
there a story behind his mustache? Because I noticed that throughout history, he's pretty much the only person that I remember with that mustache like that. That's just blocked off right underneath his nose, and very wolfy at that point, but bald everywhere else. So if y'all know anything, please let me know.
From that point on, it no longer mattered what most other Germans thought, whether about race or war or anything else. But before then, when voters in Germany had their last free choice, what were Hitler's supporters supporting? What did they know, and when did they know it? A study that attempted to answer these questions concluded, middle class and other voters did not vote for Hitler because he promised to exterminate European Jewry. Neither did they vote for him because he promised to tear up the Constitution, impose a police state, destroy labor unions, eradicate rival political parties, or cripple the churches. Even Hitler's Mein Kampf did not forecast these events. During the years leading up to the Second World War, Hitler moved against the Jews in
So I had to look that up as far as the Hitler's mustache. It apparently was saying that he wanted a full Bavarian mustache, but to fit a gas mask over it, he had to chop it. So it's just sort of like that narrow one that sort of he's famous for. So just look that up for you guys, real time.
orchestrated stages, allowing him to gauge the extent to which German public opinion supported his actions. A Nazi-sponsored boycott of Jewish stores in 1933 failed so badly that it was called off after 4 days, rather than have it be an ongoing fiasco. Even after 5 years of anti-Jewish propaganda in Germany, when the Nazis in November 1938 unleashed Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken
Kristallnacht.
Glass, featuring violence against Jews, their homes, and their businesses, the negative reactions of Germans, including some Nazi party members, led Hitler to proceed against the Jews thereafter with as much secrecy as possible. Even when Jews were rounded up and sent off to concentration camps, there was nothing at that point to indicate the grisly fate awaiting them, and it was a crime punishable by death to reveal the extermination program. Rumors circulated, and some undoubtedly knew more than rumors, but rumors and speculations always abound in wartime. Moreover, even those who were certain of what was happening had no ability to stop it in a totalitarian state, and they and their families could pay with their lives for publicly protesting. Even a prominent German Jewish leader like Leo Beck said that he did not know about Auschwitz and the systematic killing of Jews until 1943, even though millions of Jews had already been killed by then. Genocide against the Jews was a government program, not the lethal mob violence unleashed against the Jews in earlier pogroms in Eastern Europe, or against the Armenians in Turkey during the First World War, or against the Igbos in Nigeria in the 1960s, or against the Chinese in a number of Southeast Asian countries on a number of occasions over the...
I'm trying to square this. So isn't Anne Frank, like, she hid in the attic for like a year or two or something because they were like rounding up the Jews? So how... It's not like people weren't aware. I mean, maybe they weren't aware of the conditions of Auschwitz and the Holocaust. I mean, the gas chambers and things like that. But they were certainly aware of the policies, racist policies.
the centuries. Given the fact that Jews had been stripped of legal protections early in the Nazi regime, any of these things might have been done by the German people. Indeed, Hitler tried to represent Kristallnacht as a spontaneous burst of public outrage, rather than as the staged event that it was.
Could you imagine? Because great majority of them gentlemen that are standing up there right now, they felt like they were doing the right thing for their country or for the person who was their leader at the time. And they all have families. They all, because you know that's how it is. We look out for our families first, and then everything else follows suit. But every single last one of them, they thought that they were on the right side of everything that was going on, regardless of everyone that was being hurt in the process, killed in the process, the laws that were being made against complete peoples back then. All of these gentlemen thought and felt like they were on the right side. And you can't tell them anything. It was like, because you can't deny the fact that they had families, that they were people first. When they bled just like everyone else, they cried just like everyone else. You know what I mean? It's something, man. It's something. I just had to point that out. Okay.
That's why I like his reactions, because sometimes he brings in a human element, and sometimes that's what we don't think about when we're looking at history. You're not thinking about these are actually people around these, horrible characters that we think of Hitler as just such, an evil person, obviously, but there was people around him that were looking out for their families and doing what they thought was right, or maybe they believed to a certain extent, sort of drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But, yeah.
But what the German people did not do in these circumstances may be more revealing about their own attitudes. None of this denies that there were anti-Semitic fanatics in Germany, both in the Nazi Party and among the German public. It simply makes the dimensions and duration of anti-Semitism among Germans at large subject to question. What must also be noted is that Jews were a very small minority in pre-Hitler Germany, never as much as 2% of the population, despite their prominence or even predominance in particular fields such as medicine, journalism, or banking. The average German had no...
That's one thing that I think is always important to know and to understand, is that there are, just like slavery. I think that somebody was saying on one of these slavery videos, I don't know, I've been watching a lot of stuff on kind of in this vein recently, since Jasmine and I did that video that kind of got a little bigger on our channel anyway. But there are people that, a small number of people that, relative to the size of the nation, that owned slaves and mistreated their slaves and did horrible things to their slaves, but it had an economic impact, and so people were hesitant to call it out. So even though they weren't participating in slavery, they weren't calling it out and was allowing it to go on, but the people that were actually perpetrating it were relatively small in comparison. So, even though, a lot of white people will be like, well, my ancestors did not, own slaves, most probably Americans can say that. There was a lot of Americans that were not tearing it down actively. And I know the Civil War happened, and there were, hundreds of thousands of lives, died to put slavery to an end. So that is a good thing, which I recently realized that Lincoln was, to preserve the Union, he was trying to, he was saying, if slavery ends, or if ending slavery is what it takes to preserve the Union, to get the South and the North back together, then he would do that. If keeping slavery would keep the North and the South together, he would keep slavery. If it was this appeasement policy, that's what he would do. His original goal was to keep the North and the South together. When obviously that wasn't possible, he did make the right choice to galvanize people and say, we'll make this about slavery. And so people were fighting for something larger than themselves. Even though they were winning the war, they needed a moral reason to continue to fighting, even though the bloodshed was, so costly. And so the Emancipation Proclamation and, in his speech and everything, that solidified that it was about racism. So, and ending slavery, actually. So,
no compelling reason to be thinking about Jews, one way or another. And indications are that most were apathetic about anti-Semitism.
That's wild that it was so little of them, but they were still able to go so far and be able to get some of the top paying jobs and all these other things, careers and whatnot. They They just kept going, man. Shout out to them.
both before and during the Nazi era. Nevertheless, the egregious behavior of the Nazis toward the Jews prompted some Germans to come to their aid, even during wartime, when that meant risking death for themselves and their families. Estimates of the number of Jews hidden in Berlin alone during the Second World War run into the thousands. As for post-Hitler Germany, perhaps the following capsule account from Commentary magazine, published by the American Jewish Committee, is as revealing as any. All told, Germany's voluntary payments for past wrongs amount thus far to more than $55 billion over a period of 6 decades, and are unparalleled in history. These were not the reparations after the First World War imposed on Germany by the victorious powers. These were reparations voluntarily paid by a democratically elected German government. This did not, of course, mean that all hostility to Jews had been obliterated in Germany. It does suggest that such hostility was not pervasive nor necessarily greater than in other European countries. It is hard even to imagine such reparations being paid to persecuted groups by democratically elected governments in places like Rwanda, Uganda, Fiji, or other countries where minorities have been expelled or slaughtered.
You know what I call Thomas Sowell? I call him Mr. Perspective. You want some perspective? You listen to some Thomas Sowell, you read some Thomas Sowell. He's going to give you some perspective.
I like that.
Because he's going to give you someone else's side in a way that you've never heard in your life. Just to let you know that you're not the only one. Some people have gone through a lot more. Since you're not studied, you wouldn't know. It's okay though. I'll help you out with that information. That's the type of feel I get from Thomas Sowell. That's why it's imperative that if you haven't already, please share this with somebody on Facebook.
So yeah, so I also realized recently that the 40 acres and a mule after that was immediately following the Civil War to freed slaves, and then after, because Lincoln was shot and Andrew Jackson, or Johnson, I'm blanking, sorry, forgive me, immediately took over, and he because Lincoln was trying to compromise, and he was Republican, and the Democratic Party at the time was very pro-slavery. He took all of those properties back and gave it back to the white landowners. So we had reparations, and then we took it back. So it's sort of a crazy fact that I think I've heard that, but it didn't really sink in. And so sometimes when you're learning all this and you're putting it into context with other things that you're learning, you can learn things in a straight line. And I think we do that in history as kids and growing up through school. We kind of learn it in a simplistic way so that we can digest it and understand some certain facts and some dates and get to sort of like on a line. And then as you grow up, if you start looking into these histories, you start adding layers onto it, and then chunks, and then as you get more information, you're able to just add more things on it. And that's, again, what I appreciate about Van, because he's really taking the time to add layers into the gaps that he's missed and give himself a much more fuller understanding. And I really appreciate this guy a lot, and so that's why I like reacting to him. And I hope you enjoyed this reaction to his reaction, and I hope you will join us next time on the Johnny Random Show. We will see you next time.